my questions are, first of all, and maybe you said and I just missed it because I was a bit tired, but who are the people or who are the institutions that actually took the initiative in bringing this in as policy for the schools? That's number one. And number two, what has been the attitude of the trade union, which is a left-wing union, so one would expect them to be very much sensitive to this and very much wanting to support. So they're the two questions. Who really drove and initiated, and what's actually the position of the Australian Labor Party?
In terms of the trade union movement, or at least the left division of the trade union movement, I can speak with all confidence that the MUA as one union support LGBTIQ rights, whether it be marriage equality, the Safe Schools program, anti-bullying campaigns, trans rights. There's a whole range of things that are currently being discussed, and from my understanding, the majority of unions support that. Having said that, there are some right-wing unions who don't support it. So,
Just the teachers' union.
Sorry?
I was referring to the teachers.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the teachers' union position on it is. I know a lot of lesbian and gay teachers, so I would assume that they would support their staff members to some degree, but that you shouldn't assume. The other part of your question, which are who are the institutions who took the initiatives and brought it to the school's attention, from my understanding, at least two of the groups one was ACON and the other one was the Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby. They were definitely two of I'm not sure who else was incorporated. Perhaps there was a teachers group, I'm not sure where that came from, or a PNC, Parents and Citizens group. Perhaps Vic would know more information.
New South Wales Teachers Federation are pro Safe Schools. In terms of when it was established, it was first funded in 2010 by the Victorian government, and it was funded to an organisation called the Foundation for Young Australians, and they created it. I'm not entirely sure about what their major aims and coverage are, but then they worked closely with La Trobe University to develop the program, and then it's extended beyond those boundaries now.
Thank you, Victoria, for revealing how significant this was in my interest, almost lifelong, but certainly over the last 30 years, in terms of the relationship between learning the classroom in particular, but also learning at a distance with the culture. My particular interest has been in rural education, but what I see here is that there's a distinct example with regard to LGBTI, the place of that in the curriculum and the place of that in kids' learning. I might, if I have a second go this time, but the more simple question, which I'll direct to both of you, comes from the fact that when I started teaching in the early 60s, we were trusted in our relationships with the kids. And indeed, the ministers for education didn't know too much about education. They were more concerned about the provision of the services, provision of the schools and the employment of teachers and so on. And it was the Director General of Education who was the professional leader. After the 70s, that started to change, and part of neoliberalism has in fact been to inject more political prescription over what happens in the classroom. It is just onerous. It's clearly social control of the neoliberal kind, which is to push the middle and working class people down and to enhance the What do you see about the language you've both spoken that this, in a sense, should be prescriptive for schools? Whereas I would challenge you that that's not going to be possible unless you change the culture of the teachers in the schools in the first place. And you're not going to do that with a program. A program will provide support, but it's not going to determine what learning experiences are provided for the kids.
I'm going to try and reiterate your question. Potentially that you're suggesting that there's too many requirements on teachers from the government, and how do you change the culture through learning? Is that kind of it?
Yes, but stick to LGBTI.
Okay. Okay. It's a bit of a chicken and egg question, isn't it? So how do you change the culture without a program? But how do you change a culture at all? We need something to change the culture. And you say you're from rural schools, particularly in rural schools where LGBT kids are more isolated, have less resources, and feel intense surveillance upon them. The thing is, I think for me, that a lot of teachers are completely unaware of these issues in their schools. They think that they're not a problem, they think that the kids are joking, they think that it's just part of youth culture. But the thing is that kids are really, really damaged by these experiences. They feel really alone and they feel really ashamed. So we need something to happen, we need something to change. How do you change a teacher culture? Well, that's a really good question. If we knew that, we would be changing them all over the place. But to give schools an opportunity to audit themselves and to tell teachers what's happening in these school groups, what's happening in these social groups right now. Is this actually really damaging kids? Because most teachers really care about their students. Most teachers want to look after them. And to give them an opportunity to understand them better, to understand what's happening with them, and then to address that in some way, I think is really powerful, and that will go some way to changing the culture around this. It's also important not to overload teachers. Teachers work very, very hard. They have huge workloads and they have huge requirements from state organisations to deliver content in particular ways. So I take your point that things from top down can often overburden teachers. The important thing is not giving them extra things to do. The important thing is just swapping behaviours. One research study said if teachers spent as much time policing homophobic language as they did school uniforms, it would change an entire school culture. So it's just changing what we have priorities about. That would be my answer.
Yeah, that was a very good answer. I guess from my perspective as a parent of children and taking all my other hats off, I would hope, and at least 2 of my 3 kids want to be teachers, is that if they're taught tolerance, inclusion and acceptance, that by the time they become teachers, it won't be an issue. They will automatically be sticking up for anyone being bullied in the classroom. As for the current teacher program, I think they need to be taught these the Safe Schools program, the anti-bullying initiatives in their teaching, whilst they're still studying being teachers, and the current teachers should be retrofitted with the skills in dealing with diverse situations in the playground where they might be out of their comfort zone and might feel differently, but ultimately it's the safety of the children. It's the safety of how the children feels. If they have their own issues, those are their issues. We need to be concerned about what's happening with our kids, I think. And as for it being prescriptive and too many rules for the teachers to follow, that's their job.
Thank you for your talk. My name is Kieran. Do you think that the ideological attack from the right on the Safe Schools program by right-wing ideologues and religious fanatics is an extension of the culture wars designed to muddy the waters in the lead-up to the proposed plebiscite on same-sex marriage? And why are these religious fanatics and right-wing extreme liberals so hung up on sex? so intent on reinforcing the gender binary stereotypes and such increasingly unrepresentative institutions as the nuclear family. And Corey Bernardi, with his statements that the institutions like the who support the Safe Schools program, such as Beyond Blue, the Australian Secondary Principals Association, the Australian Education Union, and the Australian Council of State School Organisations, are fronts in a conspiracy to indoctrinate our children into a Marxist agenda of cultural relativism and queer theory. If these organisations are indeed Marxist relativists, are the Greens, therefore, and I'm thinking here of Anthony Albanese's recent tirade against Greens candidate Jim Casey, Trotskyists intent on overthrowing capitalism? But seriously though, do you think the sexual politics within the Parliament represent the views of the Australian population, and are conservative views such as Bernardi's vastly overrepresented in Australia's political system?
To the first question, yes. To the last question, no. To the stuff in the middle, are they representing the Australian public? No, I don't think so. I think it's mostly a political ploy. I think that there's some aspect of getting marginal seats in there, basically, which I think most of the kind of machinations of the political parties in the last few weeks has been about. I think, and pre-selections, yes. Do you want to take over, Sue?
It's a representation of dirty politics and a representation of what donor funding, large amounts of money into political campaigns, buys from political parties and what they say.
Hi, I'm a teacher, I have to confess. I just thought I'd agree with Victoria's comment. Teachers have a very busy day, and I'm not a classroom teacher, I'm a disability support teacher, so I travel from school to school, and I get to sit in classrooms and observe teachers more often than anybody else does, probably. I mean, other people in my role do that. So I see how busy they are, but I also think that we've had this emphasis on multiculturalism over the last few years, and I see that kids there are very diverse multicultural populations in the schools I go to. I'm working in South Sydney, and there's definitely tolerance there. There's a lot of tolerance. There's so many kids with different areas of disability and different cultural backgrounds, and kids are very tolerant towards every difference in their classrooms, and bullying is just so discouraged, just so out that nobody does that much, although obviously quietly it goes on in the background and in the playground, I don't deny that. But I'm just wondering, and I know that in the younger population that there's a big awareness of sexual diversity, much more than in past generations. So I'm just thinking there's now going to be perhaps a natural impetus towards that tolerance coming into the school as well as the next big thing, because everybody in those younger generations is much more aware of it, and because you've got different parent groups. So I was wondering how that Gaby Baby package is going to be implemented in the school, if anybody knows. I just heard it announced today as well, and I know how hard it is to squeeze things into the curriculum, but I'm thinking it'll probably come into that social studies area about different family types with different parents, you know, single parents, gay parents, the whole thing. That'll be part of the curriculum before long. I think it's a natural progression because of the acceptance of diverse population. But I'm asking you, sorry, just a question. I think that was all I wanted to ask you. Do you think that that's likely to happen, a natural progression? Also, I think the scrapping of the chaplaincy program and moving towards counsellors opens the way for, you know, people from different sexual preferences, if they're having problems at school and whatever, maybe will allow them to have an avenue that they can explore people to talk to. Whereas the chaplaincy program, I think, was designed to, you know, to preach whatever religion to, you know. I mean, I know a school I was at where it's a mostly Muslim population, had 2 chaplains. It just seemed so odd, you know, they had nothing really in common with the students. Anyway. So, yes, the question is, do you think it's a natural progression to that kind of tolerance building up?
It's great to hear about the schools that you're working in, and it's really great to hear stories of these really successful and inclusive schools. I find it absolutely hilarious about the Gaby Baby thing, seeing as the first time that movie was planned to be shown in a school, it was shut down by the government without any parent complaint.
No.
and now it's being produced as a learning resource. The irony. So pretty amazing turnaround there. We'll see how it's taken up, I think, but that's a really great movement for that and a great film. As to how multiculturalism progresses, I mean, I guess it's something that we hope, we hope that there will be a progression of inclusion from racial and cultural to sexual and gender inclusion. Only time will tell, I guess. But I think we've got to do more. You know, we had a national agenda for multiculturalism, and yet the government is not dragging its feet, it's actually pulling us backwards in terms of sexual and gender diversity. So we need some kind of help from the top as well with that.
My question is to find out from you whether programs like the Safe Schools are being implemented in other countries. For example, UK you mentioned, some studies in UK and so on. Other countries where this is well underway and they have successfully implemented. So we can point out to those and then say that it works there. So there's no reason why we should have all this fear about these things here. Thank you.
Actually, it's really interesting about Safe Schools because Australia led the way amazingly. I was shocked. When I was living in England, I was telling people about how amazing this Australian initiative was and talking about how great the results were, and there was nothing like it in the UK. In the USA, they have Gay Straight Alliances, which have been a really, really great program. They are independently adopted by schools, led by students and supported by staff, and they've had fantastic results. Basically, the idea behind them is that the students organise, they create a safe and inclusive space for LGBT students at the schools, they promote activism on campus, whether it be in high school or university or colleges, and they're really, really positive initiatives. But Safe Schools was the first that I know of in the world that actually interrogated school environments and sought to redress inequality in terms of sexuality and gender diversity.
It's been a really very interesting night for me. I've got two questions. One is, do you have any idea what the impact of the changes to the Safe Schools program has been since the government made its move? And do you really think it's going to be a real issue in the elections, or are we witnessing a sort of internecine fight in the Liberal Party here?
I think the impact of the Safe Schools and the fact that it's back in the media, the impact is for the kids that are most affected by the lack of inclusion of Safe Schools programs. So the people that identify as lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, intersex, queer, I think that's all of them. Once we start talking about rights for people being different, dependent on who they identify as, I think that that's where the turmoil begins for the individuals. As for is it a real issue in the election, it is to some degree in that the right wing is creating a fear amongst people, and sadly it may have an impact on this plebiscite. Now the plebiscite, it's my own personal feelings, is a massive waste of money. No one asked me whether you could get married. Why would you ask you if I could get married? It doesn't seem to make sense or be fair. If it's a human right, then as a human we should have that right. But that's an opinion, not a policy stance. So is it a real issue for the election? It is only in the sense of fear-mongering. You know, the Gonski funding, like so many other school funding, there's not enough money being put into public education. You know, there's electorates such as my own in Blaxland that have desperate leftover maintenance issues, leaky taps, leaky roofs. It's phenomenal what the government's not addressing. And the Safe Schools program is almost a cost-effective system where it's about having the conversation to improve acceptance and you know, love for kids. I don't see how that can be a bad thing, and it shouldn't be an issue for the election. But I guess it depends on who's going to play which parts of dirty politics in the campaign in the run up towards it.
I have a question about the role of parents in supporting the Safe Schools program, particularly in the primary school. And I know parents who've been alarmed by the fear in some of the press reports about material where they've been very supportive of the program. Is anything being done through the PNC Federation, or how have parents in schools supported my children beyond school now? But I'd like. And the other question, could you just tell, I know you touched on it earlier, but tell us a little bit about how the Safe Schools program operates and what sort of, how, actually what is said. I know you mentioned about changing history, but what sort of things are the children taught? Is it a general inclusiveness sort of program? When is it done?
In terms of parents supporting the program, well, at the moment, there's nothing that you can do in terms of primary school support because it's been taken out. The only thing you could do is write to your local MP, write a letter, that old trick. But unfortunately, apart from that, the only place where the program is set to continue at this stage is in Victoria, where Daniel Andrews is committed to full funding for the program, which is really great for that particular state. And it's deserving it because it started the whole program and continues to be progressive, the most progressive state in terms of sexual and gender politics in Australia. The second question, which was...
How does Safe School operate?
Oh yeah, what actually happens in Safe Schools. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but from my understanding, a school signs up of its own volition and is then met with representatives of the Safe Schools Coalition. They will come in and consult with the schools. They will give the option of the school conducting an audit. So a student survey, a staff survey, they collate all the results and you get a picture of where your school's at in terms of sexual and gender diversity, attitudes, bullying, all of these kind of things. They will then provide kind of resources and support materials to assist with lesson plans, and they can also provide guest speakers, and they can also provide kind of support to teachers to conduct the lessons. They have actually lesson plans that they provide to the schools, so teachers in the school can conduct those lessons, or they can ask someone from the coalition to come in and team teach with them. And actually, in terms of social sexual education, team teaching actually has the best outcomes when you cooperate with an external organisation, so that's a really, really good result in terms of the curriculum and the content and all those kind of things. I think that's about all I know about it, but yeah.